I very well hate the backlighting that window gives me, so I might cover it next time I do a rant. One second, actually. There. Probably much better for you. This is another one of my rants. And this time it's about one of the biggest things Star Wars fans rant about. And that is George Lucas can't write. I just finished Knights of the Old Republic 2. As you know, I've already finished Knights of the Old Republic 1, and I was pretty happy about that. I'm even happier that I finally beat KOTOR 2 via a series of admittedly cheap but pretty awesome techniques. How do I put this? Every time George Lucas retcons a series, every single time he, I don't know how else to put it, but changes the past or the current or whatever, whenever he rewrites things, it flies in the face of other things he's already established. Which is, and that's because I know George Lucas is behind the CG TV series going on Cartoon Network, but it's obviously not canon for a billion different reasons. I'm not going to get into all of them, but one of the major ones, one of the things that really gets me, is he established in Knights of the Old Republic what Mandalorians were. Originally, in their culture, in the way they run things, they were very much a warrior race, proud and lived on the noble concepts of battle, aka they were honorable soldiers that wanted to challenge, that wanted to fight for the sake of fighting, that wanted to face their foes and prove their worth. And they would go through some pretty underhanded means to do it. But that's to be expected. They live and breathe war, so even killing off civilians, it may leave a bad taste in their mouth personally, but if it draws out the best of their opponent, they would do it. They were dirty fighters, but honorable. It's really weird how to put it. But they had honor to them. And they fought the Republic. They were admittedly hired by Exar Kun, but not the point. They fought because for the sake of war, for the sake of being out there and fighting people. And that's what they were as a planet. As a whole nation, that's what they were. And in KOTOR 1, Cantor has said that due to the Mandalorian Wars, that was actually their undoing. They were destroyed by Revan. I mean, decimated. We're not even going into the actions of Revan afterward, blah, blah, blah. But during the Mandalorian Wars, Revan's tactics ripped them to pieces. They barely stood a chance. They put up a good fight, but they were doomed. Simply put, as soon as Revan came into the war, they were done. Problem with this is, that meant that they were pretty much extinct, and those that were still around were more guns for hire than they were anything else. And that's where KOTOR 1 effectively leaves off. KOTOR 2 picks up where, when you run into the Mandalorians again, one of them, going by the title of Mandalore, which is very important to them all, basically the head honcho, the leader of them all, the strongest, most noble and honorable of every last one of them, Mandalore steps up and goes, yeah, I'm going to organize you guys. We're going to make a comeback. We're going to survive, even if it kills us, effectively. So he reunited the Mandalorians. Now, that would be a perfect segue into the current cartoon, if it hadn't already been established not only in the previous movies, but in the previous games and in the Episode 2 movie itself, that Jango Fett was the last of the Mandalorians. That's why he wanted a clone of Boba Fett. He wanted a clone of himself to continue the Mandalorian line, and I figured that he was probably thinking that, and even the clone troopers were sort of an extension of that, weren't just money, because he obviously wanted Boba Fett, but he wanted to train the next Mandalorian. He wanted to have strong Mandalorian to back him up, right? So by raising him in the ways of the Mandalorian, Boba Fett became the last of the Mandalorians because he still carried that bloodline. The newest cartoon screws with that. Heckly. I mean, Jango Fett, admittedly, did die in the second movie. In Episode 2, he died, but Boba Fett was still around, but he's still too young to, be Boba Fett, the Boba Fett we know in the original trilogy, and he can't die in that cartoon because that would ruin the original trilogy. Not that George Lucas cares for the canon in the original trilogy, considering the newest change. But by the very nature, that meant that Boba Fett basically became a bounty hunter to fulfill that sort of honor code, so he could still be a gun for hire, still fight reasonably good foes, fight for the pleasure of war, fight for the honor, the glory, as opposed to just being some scumbag, right? Because he's not. Boba Fett's honorable, and when you give him conditions like no disintegrations, he'll listen to it. He wants to have a reasonably good fight. And that therein lies some of the things. It's like, in any case. But he did see what it did to his people, and thus why he was more like, okay, freeze him in carbonite, whatever. But it was still Boba Fett's trap. He was working with the Empire, but it's more like a tool. The problem with the newest series is they brought back Mandalore. As in, like, the planet Mandalore. It's in its full glory, hundreds upon hundreds of Mandalorians. But if that was the case, the Mandalorians aren't ones for democracy at all, ever. It's in their very blood to be warriors. That being said, if they had gotten that strong again, they would have challenged the Republic again. They would have fought again. By the time the current series takes place, they would have forgotten or at least filed away and learned lessons from the Mandalorian Wars. They may not remember it, nor believe that their culture could have ever sunk to such a low, but they would work on their old technology or new technology and be the warrior race that they once were. They wouldn't be these... how do I put this? They wouldn't be the... how do I put this? It's really hard to put it. They wouldn't be a bunch of hitmen that fly around hating Jedi. They wouldn't. Yeah, they would want to fight Jedi because they're a good fight, really good, honorable thing. And when you have the lightsaber of a Jedi, that proves something. That's a trophy. You can wear that proudly as long as you didn't just nick it from them and claim you killed somebody. As long as you legitimately took down a Jedi and they can believe that lightsaber is proof. That's an honor thing. You can carry that. And I highly doubt they would continue to have such hatred for the Jedi, considering the Mandalorians in Knights of the Old Republic 2, they don't necessarily hate the Jedi. They respect them for their strength. They view that the Force has made the Jedi weak, and thus, whatever, but they don't lessen anything. They're just like, you are not... Many of the Jedi are so dependent on the Force that their physical stance and stature is lessened. They aren't like us. They aren't built weapons. They use the Force. That makes them a threat. But at the same time, they're a challenge because of it. It gives them an unfair advantage, which they think is dishonorable, but they don't hate them because it's once again one of those things where it's like Mandalorians, after what Revan did, I'm sure that would go down in their history books for centuries. Because Revan, using tactics and soldiers, not just the Force, but using tactics and soldiers, decimated their entire line through a series of hundreds of feints and all of these things just through tactics. And being savage. They respected it. Because even though he fought roughly, even though he fought the way he did, he was honorable about it. But that's something that would stick with them, is they would respect the Jedi for the strength and potential they have, but view them as weak for their dependence on the Force. So it would create this interesting dynamic of, in order for a Jedi to be accepted as a comrade, they would have to prove their worth in a battle without the Force, to be accepted as a Mandalorian. But the Mandalorians wouldn't hate them any more than they do anybody else. They would challenge them to fights. They would want to fight them. But the reality is, they wouldn't necessarily hate them. They wouldn't have any sort of, strong dislike, Jedi killed my father kind of stuff. Because the way the Mandalorian culture works, if somebody dies in the middle of a battle or hunting a trophy, that just proves that their foe was stronger than them and gives honor to their foe. Same thing is true of Revan. They didn't hate Revan because he slaughtered their people. No, they respected him for the great strength he showed in tactics. They were impressed. They were dumbfounded and astounded and almost revered Revan because he was able to do this. My point being, the Mandalorians in the cartoons right now are not Mandalorians. And George Lucas can't write for crap. And the Mandalorians are just one of the many ways in which I can prove it. By dissecting, not even using the books, just using the things that George Lucas himself wrote. I don't... Every single time George Lucas retcons the Star Wars series, it makes less and less sense. And I think what really gets on his nerves is that everything he writes, the fans are lukewarm on. And the hardcore fans really don't care for him like that. I mean, a lot of... The Empire Strikes Back, one obviously among the fan base, is the best. But it's also the one that all the most memorable scenes, all the ones that are loved the most, George Lucas had the least to do with. He just sort of put them in there, and then you know you have a problem when your actors know your characters better than you do. Seriously. That's a major problem. And when the fans know your characters better than you do, you're screwed. So he can try and hook the new generation and see if he can't convince them, but as soon as somebody goes back and tries to pick apart the previous stuff and try and mesh it all together and put it together like a puzzle, it's not going to work. He can't write for crap. He knows it. I know it. Sorry, Anyway. So yeah, that was my rant about George Lucas and his inability to write. Can't write for crap. That is my official opinion. I mean, don't get me wrong, I am a massive Star Wars fan. I'm not like I know the color of Chewbacca's eyes or whatever. The only reason I would know that at all is because of Star Wars Trivial Pursuit that came out forever ago. But it's just, I grew up with Star Wars. And everybody knows the only animated series that's canon with the movies, if you want to factor the prequels as canon at all, even though it sort of ruins the series a bit, maybe, is the original one that came out right before Episode 3 did. Because that was planned. It was planned to explain the gaps between them. It was a series of 15-minute episodes. I don't remember. I want to say there was about 30 of them. And basically it told the story of what happened during the Clone Wars. It was the original Clone Wars animated series. And it made sense. It explained why Grievous was hunched over and coughing, and showed how awesome and scary he was. Trust me, when that movie came out, I was like, Grievous. Because he was a monster in that series. But it's like, that's the only one that's canon. And that was really awesome. You even got to have one whole 15-minute episode dedicated to a non-talking Mace Windu destroying an entire army single-handedly. And that lends credence to the Force Unleashed thing. Is a lot of the things you can do in Force Unleashed are similar to what Mace Windu was doing. So, I don't know how else to put it. George Lucas can't write, unless he plans to, and even then, he needs other people to kind of make it better, because they know his book better than he does. And yes, I call it a book, because let's face it, he's prone to making trilogies, even if they're not going to be any good. This is Blackchibisan, and I'm done with this rant.